Last time we explored Windows NT 4.0 Terminal Server Edition, Microsoft's foray into multi-user computing on the NT platform. But the story doesn't begin there. In fact, it goes all the way back to 1990 with a modified version of Microsoft's OS/2 simply known as multi-user. Let's talk about legacy network technology. I'm the Vintage Collector and these are my stories. So let's have a deeper look at Citrix.
Citrix. It's pronounced as Citrix, you babbling baboon.
Not Citrix or Citrix. Citrix. And now you know.
Okay, I don't know why some people get so worked up about pronunciation. I mean, I even got hate mail for saying it wrong. But fine, from now on it shall be pronounced properly as Citrix. Happy now? As Microsoft was still pushing OS/2 as the future operating system, the independent software company Citrix quietly took that base and added multi-user and multi-session capabilities, allowing multiple people logging into the same machine from terminals across the network. The product, when it first saw light of day in 1990, was simply called multi-user. For the demo, I installed Multi-User 1.0 into 86 box. I chose a rather basic configuration with 4 MB of RAM, an 88 MB hard drive and a 386 CPU. Installing multi-user is no big deal. What's interesting though is that in some places Microsoft's name strings have been replaced, as in here to say Citrix HPFS instead of Microsoft HPFS. On the other hand, there seem to be some occurrences in the user guides referring to the underlying operating system as OS/2. Although Multi-User 1.0 was based on OS/2 1.21, it lacked the presentation manager that was introduced with OS/2 1.1. Without Presentation Manager, Multi-User couldn't run graphical applications, making it strictly a text mode system. Furthermore, also the DOS support was stripped away, leaving Multi-User only with OS/2 applications. Arguably not the best of all design decisions. That said, the only means to connect to multi-user beside the local system console was through serial connections, as there was no support for Ethernet networks included. Once multi-user is installed, it presents you with a login screen where you can log in using the default account admin and the default password Citrix. It doesn't leave you with much, only a text mode version of the OS/2 task switcher and the possibility to launch OS/2 command prompts. As OS/2 was a true multitasking OS, you can of course launch multiple command prompts at the same time and switch between them. Control Escape, today better known for calling up the Windows Start menu, serves as the hotkey for the task switcher. A small hint at the long-forgotten shared past of Microsoft, IBM and OS/2. From the command prompt, you can run the config command, which provides an interface to manage user accounts and access control lists. The latter is interesting, as OS/2's HPFS didn't natively support ACLs, having access control was mandatory to put in place for a multi-user system. What's intriguing is that the menu-driven config interface doesn't have a means to set the user password. This has to be done from the command line instead. Same goes for status commands like query and others. Now, as mentioned, you can run multiple OS/2 command prompts and application programs in parallel. You can disconnect from your session and resume it at a later stage exactly where you left off, given the admin didn't reboot the machine in the meantime. To end your session, the log of command is your friend. However, there won't be any safety nets here. It would end any session right away without asking or waiting for confirmation, even if you were still having the editor open with an ever so important text file. This version of OS2 is also enriched with process control, so you can list all running processes. And those would expose a process identifier or PID. And no surprise, there's a kill command which simply terminates any running process identified by a given PID. This is no question clearly inspired by UNIX and mainframe concepts as much as the inevitable shutdown command. As mentioned before, multi-user supported only serial line connections, which were also configurable through the config command. But as I had none of those particular terminals on hand, I tried to make it work in the emulation. But apparently, 86box has some limitations when it comes to serial lines. While you can access local serial devices on your host and even configure pass-through mode, I was unable to get it to work. And it was not that I had been creative, like also setting 86box to use one physical serial to USB adapter for the output and wiring it up to the same machine using a null modem crossover connector to another serial to USB adapter. I paid close attention to use the same settings for the serial lines, both on the emulation but also on the terminal emulator, Magwise, which should emulate a Wise60 terminal, but to no avail. Maybe one day I get one such terminal, then I'll try again. Promised. But I was still curious enough to head out for MultiUSER 2.0. At first, it gave me an install failure until I checked back at the README indicating I should have at least 6 MB of RAM. Okay, so be it. Now, here's the thing I always hated about those old operating systems. You really had to reboot after changing the partition table. Welcome to the 80s. Of course, the reason came from DOS's fundamental architecture, where it only reads the MBR once during startup, reads the partitions it supports, assigns drive letters and so forth. But for OS2, which was developed years after, couldn't they really have fixed this? It feels totally silly to reboot the entire thing, reloading floppy disk for several minutes just to continue with the formatting procedure. Anyway, Citrix MULTIUSER uses the high-performance file system HPFS to format the disk drive. Hinting again at the shared origin, also Windows NT 3.1 and 3.51 still supported HPFS and could also be installed into HPFS partitions. No surprise, as HPFS was developed by Gordon Ledwin, then Microsoft's lead architect for OS2. His counterpart as a lead architect for DOS and OS2 at IBM was Edward E. Iacobucci, who left IBM in 1989 to co-found Citrix. So this is how OS2 ties into becoming the base for MultiUSER. MultiUSER 2.0 allows more customization during setup than its predecessor, and this time round also includes the DOS environment. I'll also create an unprivileged user account right away before we enter the progress bar. What puzzled me was that the actual install disk was only called up again last to install what appears to be the actual Citrix MultiUSER extensions. Right after startup, I'll again end up on the text mode task switcher or program selector as it was officially called, so again no graphical presentation manager. The program selector added the DOS command prompt and a link to the README. The latter includes quite some hints at running different software, including Windows 3.0 in standard mode. Shall we try that? Swapping in the floppy and let's go. Oops. Yeah, as noted in the Citrix documentation, only one user at a time can access the floppy drive. And that's even true when you're logged in as an admin, so you have to reserve the drive for exclusive access, but that command doesn't seem to work from DOS mode. Alright, that seems to do it from the OS2 session. Now, as noted in the README, you must install Windows into c:\wincmu, and if you need to know the next step, simply switch back to the README. That's nice, indeed, multitasking while installing Windows. Note that I don't have a network installed, so let's skip that for the Windows setup. Once Windows is installed, don't change the config.sys and .exec.bat file, but opt to do it manually. As by the instructions, run this special install batch file, which adds some OS2 specific customizations to Windows. And this hints at something very interesting, but more on that in a minute. First edit autoexec.bat, config.sys and system.ini before rebooting the system. Finally, you can invoke runwin instead of the more widely known win command from a DOS session to bring up Windows 3.0. And as you can see here, it no longer reports as a standard version of Windows, but as Windows for OS2. Already during setup, but also when seeing these additions being installed and having to load those particular drivers in config.sys, it felt a lot like OS2 2.0.
Introducing Citrix MULTIUSER. Now there is a way to get the low-cost multi-user capabilities of UNIX in an operating system you already understand.
Even so, MultiUser 2.0 arrived quite late to the market, clearly after the IBM and Microsoft breakup from their joint OS2 development. This release seems to be based off OS2 2.0. My research then brought me over to Virtually Fun, who had discovered this as well. His readout of the internal version number just proves that MultiUser 2.0 was based off an intermediate release of OS2 2.0. Just at the time where Microsoft's intentions and priorities had clearly shifted to Windows and Windows NT. Meanwhile, I was exploring the config command we already know from the previous release. I noticed it now supports networking via something called LAN link over NetBIOS. I tried configuring a generic console and the NetBIOS group name, but had no clue how to tie it all to network cards and drivers. There's a supplemental driver disk that mentions cards like Stargate and Digiboard, but without the user guide I was lost. So did MultiUser support Ethernet now or not? A 1993 issue of PC World says yes, mentioning LAN Manager and Novell, so I expected support for IPX, SPX and any 2000 compatible network cards. I also got some indicative price tag stating MultiUser costs $995 for a 5 users base version or $19.95 for an unlimited amount of users, not including the price for the additional hardware or the software-only terminal emulation program for $99 per seat. Said terminal emulator was called Citrix MULTIUSER Link. Installing it on DOS, I then retried my previous setup again using 2 USB to serial adapters across 2 86-box VMs. first I tried to run it on a speedy 56700 baud rate, but that didn't seem to work reliably, even so I sometimes reached the login prompt. But dialing it down to 9600 baud worked. I could log in remotely. Success at last. More by coincidence, I then found another hint for the networking support in the included README file. As it hints at disabling multi-user's NetBIOS emulation when installing LAN Manager or NetWare, this seems to imply multi-user didn't include full network stacks but relied on third-party packages by Microsoft and Novell. Definitely something to revisit when I explore Novell NetWare. Let's not forget Citrix's intermediate step between multi-user and the Windows NT based WinFrame, a little known product called WinView, which was their
Your users don't have to learn a new interface because OS 2 is just like DOS.
So how about you? Have you ever heard about Citrix MULTIUSER or have you seen it in action? Leave me your thoughts and impressions in the comments section. I'm the Vintage Collector and this was my story for today. Thanks for watching and see you again next Sunday.